On one cold Thanksgiving night, a simple act of kindness by a humble mechanic not only saved a family, it sparked a movement that changed countless lives forever. Thanksgiving Day had always been a big deal for Mike Dempsey. It was the one day of the year when his entire family gathered in their small but cozy home just outside of town. His wife Ellen would spend the whole morning in the kitchen, filling the air with the warm smells of roasted turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, and freshly baked pumpkin pie. Their two teenage kids, Josh and Emily, would usually laze around in their pajamas, pretending to help while sneaking bites from the table. For Mike, this day meant rest, laughter, and the comfort of being with the people he loved most. After all, he worked long hours as a mechanic all year round, often coming home late with oil-stained hands and a sore back. Thanksgiving was a well-earned break. That morning had started like any other holiday. The sky outside was gray, and the first signs of snow were starting to fall. Mike was sipping on his coffee and tightening a loose doorknob in the garage. He never could sit still for too long even on holidays. He glanced at his watch. It was almost time to shower and change before the relatives arrived. Ellen had already laid out the silverware and was humming a song from the radio, her apron dusted. With flour, everything was perfectly normal, just the way it had always been. Then the phone rang at first.
Mike thought it might be one of his cousins calling to say they were running late. But the voice on the other end was shaky, unfamiliar, and full of
worry. A woman, clearly upset, was trying to explain that her car had broken down on the side of the highway just outside town. She said she was traveling with her husband and two small children, and they were stuck in the cold. She mentioned that she'd called several tow companies, but either no one picked up or they were all closed for the holiday. Someone had given her Mike's number, saying he might be able to help. Mike looked out the window. The snow was falling harder now, the wind was picking up, and the sun was already starting to dip behind the clouds. He could feel the warmth of the house behind him, the smell of dinner cooking, the comfort of a holiday just beginning. But he also couldn't shake the sound of that woman's voice, especially when she said they had kids with them, young kids. Stuck in a freezing car, Ellen saw the change in Mike's face before he even said a word. She knew him too well. "Don't tell me you're going out there," she said gently, not angry, just concerned. "It's Thanksgiving, Mike. The food's almost ready. Can't it wait?" Mike paused, then shook his head. "I'll be quick," he said, already grabbing his heavy coat and his toolbox. "I can't just leave them there, not with kids in the car. I'd never forgive myself." Ellen sighed, walked over and helped him zip up his coat. "Just be safe," she said, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "And come back soon." The roads were slick and quiet as Mike drove his old pickup out toward the highway. The town felt abandoned, every house glowing with lights and warmth while he passed by in the growing dark. He turned on the radio to drown out the sound of the wind howling outside, but nothing could quiet the thoughts racing in his mind. He wondered who the family was, where they were going, why they were traveling on a day like this. And more than anything, he hoped the kids weren't too cold. About 10 minutes later, he saw a black SUV sitting at an angle on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking weakly through the snow. Mike pulled over carefully, grabbed his flashlight and tools, and walked toward the vehicle. Inside, he saw a man and a woman in their 30s, both looking tired and anxious. In the back seat were two little kids, maybe 5 or 6 years old, huddled under a blanket. The little girl had her head on her brother's shoulder. Their cheeks were red from the cold. The father got out quickly and shook Mike's hand with genuine relief. "Thank God you came," he said. "We've been here over an hour." "Didn't know what else to do." Mike gave a nod, not wanting to waste any time. He popped the hood of the SUV and started inspecting the engine. It was clear something had gone wrong with the radiator, and the engine was overheating. It wasn't going to be a quick fix. He worked silently, his breath visible in the cold air. Fingers already starting to feel numb. The mother came out briefly to thank him, her voice trembling with emotion. "We were on our way to see my parents," she said. "Thought we had enough time, but the car started smoking, and we had to pull over." No one was answering. "I didn't think anyone would help today. ... Not on Thanksgiving." Mike just gave a small smile and told her to keep the kids warm. "I've seen worse," he said, Give me a little time. I think I can get it running enough to get you off the highway." He spent the next hour hunched over the engine, checking hoses, patching a leak, and carefully adding fluids. The snow was falling harder now, and his clothes were damp and cold, but he didn't stop. He knew what it was like to be stuck, to feel helpless. He thought about his own kids, safe at home, probably wondering why Dad was late. Finally, after what felt like forever, the engine coughed back to life. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get the family moving. Mike told them to follow him back into town so he could finish the repair at his garage, where it was warm and safe. The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded gratefully. Back in town. The garage was dark and quiet, but Mike opened it up and guided the SUV inside. He turned on the heater and invited the family to wait in the small office while he continued working. He made some hot coffee from an old machine in the corner and gave the kids a couple of candy bars he kept in his drawer for emergencies. The children lit up with smiles, and their mother looked like she might cry as he worked under the better lights of the garage. Mike could hear the family talking softly behind him. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but he caught little bits of conversation. They weren't from around here, that was clear. Their accents were different, and they spoke in a way that suggested they were used to a faster, busier life. Still, they were kind, polite, grateful. When Mike finally finished the job and closed the hood of the SUV for the last time, the father stood and walked over. He shook Mike's hand again, but this time he held on for a second longer. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "You missed your holiday, your family. All for strangers." Mike looked down, wiped his hands on a rag and shrugged. "I had to," he said simply. "I couldn't just leave you out there." The father looked at him closely, like he was trying to remember every detail of Mike's face. "What's your name?" "Mike Dempsey," he replied, a little confused. "Well, Mike Dempsey," the man said with a smile, "we won't forget you." The family packed up their things and got ready to go. The kids waved from the back seat, and the mother mouthed a silent thank you before they drove away into the snow-covered night. Mike stood there for a moment, watching the taillights fade, wondering if he'd ever see them again. Probably not, he thought. Just another family passing through. He finally returned home, exhausted and frozen to the bone. Ellen opened the door before he could knock, pulling him into the warm glow of their kitchen. The food was cold, but she had saved a plate for him. His kids ran up and asked a million questions, and for the first time that night, Mike smiled. He didn't tell them much, just that a family had needed help, and he did what he could. Thanksgiving. Dinner was quiet that year, but it was one Mike would remember forever. The snow continued to fall steadily as Mike Dempsey led the black SUV through the quiet streets of his town. The headlights from his old pickup truck cast a pale glow on the empty road ahead. While the family followed closely behind in the vehicle he had just patched up. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it would hold long enough to get them to safety. Mike glanced in his rearview mirror now and then to make sure they were still behind him. A part of him still worried that something might go wrong, that the engine might give out again, that the kids in the back seat would get cold before they made it to the garage. It was a strange feeling. Being out on the road during Thanksgiving night, every house they passed looked warm and full of life-glowing windows, parked cars, and the faint shadows of people moving inside. Most of the town was gathered around dinner tables, sharing stories and laughter while Mike was out here, helping strangers who had no one else to call. But he didn't regret his decision. The thought of those children, shivering in the dark car, had been more than enough to push him into action. That was just the kind of person he was. When they finally reached his garage, Mike hopped out of his truck and waved the SUV into the bay. The family parked carefully and climbed out, still bundled up in their coats. The man stretched his arms and sighed, clearly relieved. The woman carried the younger child in her arms, while the older one clung to her coat, looking around curiously. Mike flipped on the lights inside the garage. The large space lit up with a soft yellow glow, revealing tools hung neatly on the walls, a few half-finished repairs waiting for the next workday, and a corner office with an old sofa and coffee machine. The garage had a homey, lived-in feel, not like the big shiny shops people saw in cities. This was a place where people knew the mechanic by name, where you could drop your car off and trust it would be fixed with care. The father stepped forward and held out his hand again. "Thank you," he said, his voice still a little tense from the cold and the stress. "I don't even know how to express how grateful we are." Mike gave a small nod and motioned toward the waiting area. "You can take the kids inside. It's warmer in there. I'll take another look at the engine now that we're in the light." The mother hesitated, clearly worried about letting a stranger work alone on her car, but the tiredness in her eyes won. She led the kids into the office, and the father followed after casting one more grateful glance at Mike outside. The wind howled against the garage walls, but inside it was peaceful. Mike lifted the hood and examined his earlier repair. Radiator hose had been leaking badly, but he'd managed to seal it temporarily. Still, it wasn't something that could last long on the open road. He'd need to replace it properly if they wanted to travel safely. While he worked, he could hear the faint sounds of conversation from the office. The mother was trying to keep the kids entertained, reading them a story from her phone. Every now and then, a giggle broke through the silence, and Mike smiled to himself. Kids had a way of making even the worst situations feel a little lighter. About 15 minutes later, the father walked over and leaned against the wall nearby, watching Mike with interest. He didn't speak at first, just observed as Mike moved. With quiet focus, finally he said, "This is your place?" Mike glanced up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, been working here for about 15 years now. Took it over after my dad passed." The man nodded. "It's nice. Feels honest." Mike chuckled softly. "That's the goal." The man looked around at the old tools, the black and white, photos hanging on the wall, and the framed certificate from Mike's mechanic school. "You grew up around here?" "All my life," Mike replied. "Born and raised. Not much changes in a town like this. I like it that way." The man looked thoughtful for a moment. Must be nice, knowing everyone having roots. Mike didn't ask many questions in return. It wasn't in his nature. But something about this man seemed different. Not just grateful, but curious. Like he was trying to understand something deeper. Back in the office, the kids had found Mike's old toolbox and were sitting on the floor, pretending to fix their toy car. The mother watched them closely but smiled when she saw Mike walk by the window. She came to the door and said, "They've already decided you're their hero. They're planning to become mechanics now." Mike laughed, not used to that kind of praise. They've got the hands for it. She walked over to him, holding a mug of steaming coffee. "It's probably terrible," she said, "but it's warm." He accepted it gratefully. "Thanks. That machine's older than I am, but it still does the job." They stood in silence for a few moments, sipping coffee, listening to the kids' laughter. Then the woman looked at him with curious eyes. "You really gave up your Thanksgiving too? Help us?" Mike shrugged. "Didn't seem right. Leaving a family out there. I've got kids too. I know how scary it must have been." She nodded slowly. "Most people wouldn't have come. We didn't expect anyone to answer." "You're different." Mike didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't trying to be different. He was just trying to do the right thing as he went. Back to work on the car, he heard the kids' voices from the office. They were drawing now, and one of them asked his mother how to spell "thank you," Mr. Mike. He smiled to himself again. He didn't need a holiday dinner or a fancy celebration. Moments like these made him feel like he'd done something meaningful. Time passed quickly. Mike lost track of how long he had been working. The repairs were more complicated than he'd expected, but he was determined to get the job done right. He didn't want this family to end up stranded again. He cleaned out the engine, replaced the hose, and tightened the belts. He even checked the tires and brake fluid just in case. When he finally lowered the hood, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The car was ready. He walked back into the office where the family was still gathered. The father stood up immediately. "Is it done?" "Good as new," Mike said. "You should be able to make it wherever you're going." The kids ran up and hugged him suddenly, surprising Mike so much he didn't know what to do. Little girl handed him a crayon drawing of him standing next to their car with a big smile. It said "Our hero" in shaky letters. Mike took the paper gently, feeling something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time, a kind of pride. That wasn't about money or success, but about being someone people could count on. The mother and father both shook his hand again. The father looked like he wanted to say something else, something more important, but he stopped himself. Instead, he simply said, "Mike Dempsey. We'll remember that name." Mike smiled, confused but too tired to ask what they meant. Loaded the kids into the car, thanked him one last time, and drove off into the snowy night. Mike watched the SUV disappear into the darkness, standing in the open doorway of his garage with the drawing still in his hand. He finally locked up and walked back to his truck. The snow had slowed a little, and the town was silent again. He drove home. He wondered who that family really was. There was something about them that felt unusual, not in a bad way, just different. Like they had more to their story than they let on. When he pulled into his driveway, the house was glowing with soft light. Ellen opened the door as soon as she heard the engine. She smiled and waved him inside. "We waited for you," she said, placing a hot plate of food on the table. "Tell us everything." But Mike didn't want to make a big deal of it. He just sat down, thankful for the warmth, the food, and the familiar faces around him. He didn't know that tonight's events were just the beginning. He didn't know. That helping that one family would change his life forever, all he knew was that he had done the right thing in that. For him was enough. Mike Dempsey didn't think much more about the family after that night. He went back to his usual life, waking up early to get to the garage, working long hours fixing cars, trucks, and the occasional lawnmower. Winter deepened, and the days grew colder and darker. Snow blanketed the town more often than not, and people spent most of their time indoors, only stepping out for groceries or emergencies. Mike didn't mind. He liked the quiet that came with winter. It gave him time to think. Christmas came and went. So did New Year's. Life carried on the way it always had. But every now and then, Mike would catch himself thinking about that snowy Thanksgiving night, about the woman's worried voice on the phone, about the two kids wrapped in a blanket in the back seat, about the man who had said, "We won't forget you," with a strange look in his eyes. Something about that sentence had stayed with Mike, but he had no way of knowing who they really were or what he had meant. Then, or about a month later, something strange happened. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Mike had just finished working on an old Dodge pickup when his phone rang. It wasn't a number he recognized, but he answered anyway, wiping the grease from his hands. "Mr. Dempsey?" A man's voice asked. "Speaking," Mike replied. Cautious. "My name is Jordan Marks. I work for a legal firm in New York. I'm calling on behalf of a client who would like to meet with you." Privately, Mike blinked in confusion. A client? About what? "I'm not authorized to share the details," the man said politely, "but I assure you, it's not bad news. In fact, it's a positive opportunity. My client was helped by you recently, in Thanksgiving, to be exact." Mike's mind immediately jumped to the family in the broken SUV. "Wait, is this about that family I helped?" "I believe so," the man said. "They've asked me to arrange a visit. Would you be available to meet them in person? They'd prefer to come to you, to your town." Mike looked around at his garage, still full of half-repaired cars and parts. "I mean, yeah, I guess, but why all the secrecy?" "Hey, they'll explain everything when they see you," the man said. "Could we set a date? Say this Saturday?" Mike hesitated, but curiosity got the better of him. "All right, sure, Saturday works. Expect a black SUV around noon." The line went dead, and Mike just stood there holding the phone, feeling like he'd just stepped into someone else's life. Saturday came quickly. Mike cleaned up the garage, not sure why he was nervous, even put on a fresh shirt and combed his hair, which he rarely bothered with. Ellen teased him a little, but she could tell he was unsure about what was going to happen at exactly noon. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. It was sleek, new, and clearly expensive. A driver in a suit stepped out and opened the back door. Out came the same man and woman from Thanksgiving, but they looked different now. The man was wearing a tailored coat, polished shoes, and a scarf that probably cost more than Mike's monthly rent. The woman was dressed simply but elegantly, and the kids followed close behind, both holding a gift-wrapped box in their hands. Mike walked forward, wiping his hands on a cloth out of habit. "Mike Dempsey," the man said warmly, shaking his hand. "It's so good to see you again." "You too," Mike said, still confused. "You look different," the man chuckled. "Yes, well, we didn't exactly look our best when we met. Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Benjamin Carter. This is my wife, Ava. And these are our children, Lily and Max." Mike smiled and nodded at each of them, still unsure of what was going on. "We didn't tell you the whole truth that night," Ava said gently. "It wasn't that we meant to lie, just didn't want to be treated differently." "Treated differently?" Mike repeated. Benjamin looked around the garage. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Mike led them inside to the office, where Ellen had already set out coffee and cookies, curious about the visitors. The kids sat quietly while the adults spoke. Benjamin leaned forward. "Mike, I'm the CEO of Carter Tech. It's a large technology company based in New York. We were in your town on Thanksgiving because we were trying to get away from all the noise of our usual life. It's just a short road trip. No security, no assistance, no fame, just us. And then our car broke down." Mike raised his eyebrows. He'd heard of Carter Tech. They made smart home systems, AI devices, and had been in the news for developing advanced robotics. It was a billion-dollar company. He stared at Benjamin, suddenly understanding why the man had seemed so different. "You helped us without knowing who we were," Ava continued. "You gave up your holiday, opened your garage, fixed our car, and never once asked for anything in return." "I was just doing the right thing," Mike said honestly, "and that," Benjamin said, "is exactly why we're here."
People like
"You are rare, Mike. Honest, generous, humble. We haven't stopped thinking about you since that night." Mike looked at Ellen, who was just as surprised as he was. Benjamin reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "We'd like to make you a proposal. We want to invest in your garage, upgrade your equipment, expand your business, and bring in some new tools and staff. No strings attached. You keep running the shop your way, but with our help." Mike's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "There's more," Ava added. "We'd also like to set up a scholarship fund in your name for young mechanics in small towns. It's kids who want to learn but can't afford school. Inspired by you." Blinked. "Why? Why would you do all this for me?" "Because you reminded us what real kindness looks like," Benjamin said. "In our world, people often only help when there's something in it for them. You didn't even ask our names. You just saw a family in need and helped. We want to do something meaningful," Ava added, "and we want you to be a part of it." The kids handed over the gift boxes. Inside one was a model of a sports car made from metal, engraved with the words, "Thank you, Mr. Mike, our hero." The other box held a small plaque in recognition of extraordinary kindness and humanity. Mike stared at the gifts, moved, beyond words. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally he looked up. "I don't know what to say. I'm just a mechanic." "You're more than that," Benjamin said. "You're the kind of person the world needs more of, ain't they?" Spent the next hour discussing details. Benjamin explained how the funding would work, how Mike could approve every decision, how they didn't want to take over anything, just support him. Mike listened carefully. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, but he felt that they truly meant what they were saying. After they left, Mike sat in his office, holding the metal car in his hands. Ellen stood beside him, quiet for a while, you know. She finally said, "Maybe helping that family was the best decision you ever made." Mike nodded slowly. He didn't do it expecting anything in return. That was the truth. But somehow, doing the right thing had brought something unexpected and beautiful into his life. The next morning, he went back to the garage with a new energy. For the first time in years, he felt like something exciting was about to begin. Didn't want to change who he was, didn't want fame or luxury. But if he could use this opportunity to help other mechanics, other struggling families, then maybe this was his purpose. And deep down, he felt grateful. Not just for the recognition, not for the money or the offer, but for the reminder that simple kindness could ripple out into the world in ways no one could predict. He had fixed a car on a snowy Thanksgiving night, and in return his life was about to be rebuilt into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. Of course, here is part 4 of the true real-life story mechanic skips Thanksgiving dinner to help stranded family. Stunned when he learns who they are, explained in simple and interesting English in about 2,500 words. As requested, snow was still, covering most of the town when Mike Dempsey started to notice the changes around him. It wasn't something sudden, not like switching on a light. It was quiet, slow, almost like how a tree begins to bloom in spring after a long cold winter. But the signs were there. A new tool set showed up at his garage one morning, top quality and neatly packed in shiny red cases. A week later, a team of workers arrived with blueprints for a small expansion of the garage. They were polite, professional, and had already spoken to Benjamin Carter's team. Mike hadn't even asked for any of it. But when he checked the paperwork, everything had been arranged exactly how he would have done it himself. Modest, clean, nothing too fancy. But everything useful. At first, Mike was uncomfortable. He wasn't used to people giving him things. He had worked for everything his whole lifelong hours, cold mornings, greasy fingers, and sore backs. Free things made him feel like he didn't earn them. But Benjamin had been clear from the beginning. This wasn't charity. This was a partnership. A reward for his character, not a gift for his need. Still, Mike kept waking up early, showing up at the garage before sunrise, and putting in a full day of work. He didn't want people to think success had changed him. In fact, most of the locals didn't even know about the deal. Mike didn't tell anyone about the Carters, the money, or the scholarship fund in his name. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to keep helping people, one car at a time. But news in a small town travels fast. One day, a local reporter came by the garage, camera slung over her shoulder, and notebook in hand. She asked for a few minutes to speak with Mike. He was reluctant at first, wiping his hands on a rag and looking nervously at the camera. But she was kind, and she already knew most of the story. "How does it feel to know your act of kindness is inspiring people all over the country?" she asked. Mike shrugged. "I didn't do it to be inspiring. Just didn't want to see those kids freezing in that car. Anybody else would have done the same." "But they didn't," she said with a smile. "You did." The story ran in the local paper first. Then it went online. Within a few days, bigger news outlets picked it up. "Small-town mechanic's Thanksgiving kindness changes his life" was one headline. "The man who skipped dinner and found purpose" was another. Mike laughed at that one. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt like himself. Calls started coming in from across the country. Mechanics from small towns sent messages saying they had been inspired. People who had never met him offered to donate to his scholarship fund. Even a famous auto show invited him as a guest. Mike politely declined. He didn't like being in front of cameras. He liked being under cars. The real joy came from the people around him. His old friend Paul, who had worked with him for years, started helping more often. They hired a young apprentice named Tony, a kid from a nearby town who had dropped out of school because he couldn't afford tuition. With the scholarship, Tony was able to attend night classes while working at the garage during the day. He had grease on his face half the time, but his eyes sparkled with hope. Mike noticed how the garage felt different now, just because of the new tools or the cleaner space, but because it felt like a place where people were growing, learning, believing again. Ellen, Mike's wife, saw it too. She began keeping a small notebook of names, young people who might benefit from the scholarship. Kids who showed promise but were stuck. Every few days she and Mike would sit at the kitchen table and go through the names together, reading letters and recommendations. They were building something bigger than they ever thought possible. Then one evening, familiar SUV rolled into the driveway. Benjamin Carter stepped out, this time without a suit. He was wearing jeans, a thick sweater, and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He smiled when he saw Mike. "Thought I'd check in," he said. "Mind if I come inside?" They sat in the office, the same one where they had shared coffee months ago. This time Benjamin brought a folder with him. He opened it slowly, revealing blueprints, lists, and sketches. "I've been thinking," he said. "Your garage is special. It's not just a place to fix cars. It's a place that gives people second chances." Mike nodded slowly. "Guess." "So, What if we created more garages like this? Benjamin said. One in every small town, run by people like you, supported by our company, funded through the foundation, but managed locally. We'd call them Dempsey Centers. Mike blinked. Dempsey Centers? Yes, a place where people can learn a trade, fix cars, and help others. We'd start small, maybe 5 towns in the first year. You'd help pick the towns, train the mechanics, share your way of doing things. Mike leaned back, overwhelmed. You think I can do all that? I know you can, Benjamin said, because this started with you. We don't need businessmen in suits, we need people with heart. It was a lot to think about. I could never imagined himself doing anything outside of his town. But the idea of spreading what he had built, his way of helping people, filled him with quiet excitement. He didn't say yes right away. He asked for time to think. That night, after dinner, he sat outside on the porch, staring at the snow-covered street. He thought about his father, who had taught him how to fix engines. With patience and honesty, he thought about all the people who had come through his garage over the years, farmers, teachers, teenagers with their first cars. He thought about that freezing night on Thanksgiving, when he had driven out, not knowing what he would find. And he thought about Lily and Max, handing him a drawing that said "Our Hero." He smiled softly and made his decision. Over the next few months, things moved quickly. Benjamin's team worked closely with Mike to design a plan. They picked 5 towns in different states, places with high unemployment and struggling schools. Mike visited each town personally, meeting with local mechanics, talking to young people, and listening to their stories. He didn't act like a boss. He acted like a neighbor. The first Dempsey Center opened in a small town in Ohio. A banner hung over the entrance that read, "Kindness starts here." Inside, there were workbenches, classroom spaces, and a community kitchen. Mike was there for the ribbon cutting, standing next to a teenager who had once been in trouble with the law, but was now learning to rebuild engines. By the end of the year, 3 more centers had opened. News outlets covered the openings, but Mike always stood in the background, letting the students and instructors speak. His garage back home continued to thrive. Tony became a skilled mechanic and started mentoring others. Paul managed the schedule, while Ellen oversaw the scholarship applications. The town was proud of Mike, not just because of what he had done, but because he had stayed the same humble, hard-working man. One afternoon, Mike received a letter. It was from Lily, the little girl he had helped that Thanksgiving. She was now in a new school and had won an award for writing an essay titled "The Man Who Fixed Our Car and Our Hearts." She had drawn a picture of him again, this time surrounded by smiling kids and happy faces. Mike kept the letter in his office, next to the first drawing. Every once in a while, people would ask him why he did it, why he helped strangers, why he didn't take credit for the things being built in his name. His answer was always the same: because one cold night, I saw a family in need, and I had a choice to look away or to help. I chose to help. That's all it took. And now, that one act had become a wave of goodness, touching towns across the country. But for Mike Dempsey, it still came down to something simple: do the right thing, even when no one's watching, especially then, because you never know who you're helping, and you never know how much that one small action might matter. It might just change everything. Absolutely. Here is part 5, explained in simple and interesting English with approximately 2,500 words. Without headings, just as you requested. After the first Dempsey Centers were successfully opened in several small towns, Mike began to see the true impact of what had started with a simple act of kindness on that cold Thanksgiving night. The scholarship fund was growing steadily, and young people who once had little hope for a future in skilled trades were now stepping into brighter, more promising lives. Mike often thought back to how all this had begun with a broken car, freezing temperatures, and a family in need. It was hard to believe that something so small could grow into something so big. Mike was still deeply involved in the daily work at his garage, but now he carried with him a sense of purpose he had never known before. His mornings began not just with fixing engines and changing oil, but with messages from kids who wanted to thank him or ask for advice. He made it a point to respond to every letter, every email, every phone call. To him, these were not just messages, they were stories of hope, gratitude, and dreams taking flight. One chilly spring morning, Mike got a call from Ava Carter, Benjamin's wife. She sounded excited, almost like a child about to share a secret. "Mike, you have to come to New York next week," she said. Mike frowned. "New York? That's a long way from here." "We're hosting a big event to celebrate the growth of the scholarship fund and the success of the Dempsey Centers. There will be people from all over, business leaders, educators, even some celebrities who want to support this cause. We want you to be there. You're the reason this is all happening." Mike hesitated. He didn't like crowds or public speaking. He preferred the quiet hum of the garage and the familiar faces of his town. But he knew this was important. So, with Ellen's encouragement, he agreed. The trip to New York was overwhelming. The city was loud, crowded, and dazzling in a way Mike had never experienced before. Skyscrapers stretched up into the sky, and lights flashed everywhere. But the event was held in a beautiful hall, filled with people who believed in the same thing Mike did, the power of kindness and the importance of helping others. When Mike was called to the stage, his heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't used to the spotlight. He wasn't a man who sought fame or praise, but as he looked out at the crowd, he saw faces lit with hope and admiration. He took a deep breath and began to speak. He talked about that cold Thanksgiving night, about the family stranded on the road, about the choice to help without expecting anything in return. He spoke honestly and simply, the way he always did. He didn't tell grand stories or boast. He told the truth. Kindness matters. One small act can change lives. The audience listened in silence, and when Mike finished, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't just for him. It was for the message he carried. For the idea that anyone, no matter where they come from, can make a difference. After the event, Mike found himself surrounded by people who wanted to talk to him. They asked about his work, his life, and how they could help support the Dempsey Centers. Mike felt a warmth inside, knowing that his simple act had inspired so many others. Back home, things continued to grow. The scholarship fund helped dozens of young mechanics attend school. Each success story felt like a personal victory for Mike. He loved hearing about students who had gone on to open their own garages, start families, and give back to their communities. One day, Mike received a letter from a young woman named Sarah. She wrote about how the scholarship had changed her life. She had been working multiple jobs just to pay for school, feeling tired and discouraged. But the support had given her a chance to focus on learning and to dream again. She was now a certified mechanic, working at a dealership and saving money. To open her own business, Mike kept Sarah's letter on his desk. It reminded him every day why he had chosen to help that family on Thanksgiving. It wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about opening doors and creating futures. As the years passed, Mike's garage became more than just a place to repair vehicles. It became a community hub where people gathered to learn, share stories, and support one another. Mike started hosting workshops, teaching basic car maintenance to parents and teenagers. Ellen organized holiday dinners for families who couldn't afford much, making sure no one in the town felt alone. Through it all, Mike remained humble. He never forgot the cold night when he chose to help strangers instead of sitting down to dinner. That decision had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. One winter evening, snow gently fell outside. Mike sat by the fireplace. With Ellen, they looked through a photo album filled with pictures from the past few years, the opening of the Dempsey Centers, graduation ceremonies for scholarship students, smiles of children holding certificates. "It's amazing how far we've come," Ellen said softly. Mike nodded. "I never thought helping that family would lead to all this, but it feels right. Like this is what I was meant to do." Ellen smiled. "You gave people hope, Mike. You showed them kindness matters, and you made a difference." Mike looked into the fire, feeling a deep sense of peace. He knew there would always be challenges ahead. Life wasn't easy. But he also knew that with kindness and a willingness to help, even the smallest actions could grow into something powerful. And so, the story that began on a snowy Thanksgiving night with a mechanic who skipped dinner to help a stranded family, became a story of hope for thousands. A story about how one person's choice to do the right thing can ripple through communities, change lives, and inspire others to follow. Mike Dempsey was still a mechanic, with grease under his nails and a heart full of kindness. But now he was more than that. He was a beacon of hope, a symbol of generosity, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, can change the world. And that was the greatest gift of all. Let me know if you want me to help with anything else.